I want to talk to you about how to do an assessment, um, and specifically how to do it for this class, and what I'm looking for in this class. But to give you a broader sort of sense of that also, this week I give you a case study, Teresa, to do. And what I want you to do is to read the case study, Teresa. It might help if you pause this right now and stop and read the case study. That might inform some what you're doing, but it's not crucial. Let me talk about the process of doing an assessment for diagnosing purposes. Um, First of all, this is a multi-step process. There are folks who really want to go and, oh, I see the person, so the diagnosis is thing, and it's like bang, bang. It's like doesn't happen that way. Well, actually, it does happen that way if you're really experienced and you've got a lot of background. For most of us, or in cases where I don't know what I've got exactly here, or I'm seeing something new for the first time, this is the process I go through. This is what I'd recommend you go through. I give you next week, I'm not going to give it to you this week yet, a generic format to do this in. This week I'm going to ask, this is a multi-step process. This week I'm going to only have you do a couple of steps in that and then jump to something. Next week I'll give you another case study that'll ask you to do the whole format in. My format is not the right format. It is one that contains stuff that makes sense to me, and I'd like to encourage you to use. As you're doing case studies for me, one of the things I want to encourage you, a couple things I want you to keep in mind. One is, don't assume that I know who the person is you're giving me the information about. Assume that I am your not too bright supervisor who's reading your report, and that's the only information I have. So if you do shorthand about stuff, kind of going, because he knows this, it's like wrong, it's going to hurt you in the process here. In part because what I want you to do is I want you writing assessments up with the idea in mind that maybe maybe right after you finish this assessment, somebody's going to offer you a great job and you're out the door. And your best friend's going to start your job in a month, and you're leaving behind. This is my record of what I saw. That you want to have as informative as you can about stuff, so people later understand, how did you make that judgment at that point? Not just that you made a judgment, but how did you make it? What was the data behind your judgment? What did you see? And so they can read that and kind of make sense of it and going, oh, so you saw this, and that because of that you made these judgments. So there's some thought that needs to go into about who your audience is in this, and writing for your audience, which in this case is me. Step one. In step one, this is a place to take some real discipline. In step one, what you do is you report what you observe. You look to see things and you report what you observe. Many decades ago, when I was in college, I think it was, I read the Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land. Great piece of science fiction, dated at this point, but really interesting. In the book, he had a character, Anne, I think it was, who was called a fair witness. And what a fair witness meant was, at one point, the lead character asks Anne into the room with her and points out the window and says, "What color is that house across the hill?" And Anne looks at it and says, "This side is white." Well, that really caught me, because what she did then said, I don't know about what the other side is. All I can observe is that this side is white. Now, probably the other side's white also, but I don't know that. What I report is what I know and what I can observe, what I have direct information about. So part of what I'm asking you to do in step one is to be a fair witness. Just write down what you observe and just what you observe, and don't go beyond the data. This is a data gathering piece of the process. This is gathering your data in order to make a judgment, which comes at a later point in the process. That's a really important piece. I'm going to take two ways people do this job, or do the step one wrong. First of all, what people do in the step one is they use psych jargon. Oh, Teresa is delusional, paranoid, antisocial, avoidant, psychotic, schizophrenic. You know, that they use all these, they use psych jargon. And I go, so in all cases, most of the words I just used there are wrong. Teresa is not most of those things. If you want to use a word like delusional to describe Teresa, for instance, what I would say is go get a dictionary and look up the word delusional and see what it means. And then stop and look at her behavior and say, does her behavior match that? What you do, instead of saying Teresa is delusional, you say Teresa believes this. Let me decide whether it's, or the next reader to decide whether it's delusional. It may seem very delusional to you. Don't use any of that language. Guarantee you use that side of language in my thing, and you're going to get marked down for. Because all those things are also diagnoses, and your data for a diagnosis can't be the diagnosis. The data is the behavior that just you observe. Talk about the behavior. If you think that Teresa is paranoid, people want, that's a big one people use. Oh, she's paranoid. Well, I'm going, what's it based off? Well, she thinks people are talking about her. And I think read the case or Teresa case carefully and think about if you saw Teresa downtown and saw what she looked like and how she behaves, wouldn't you watch her too? So if people are watching her and talking about her, is she paranoid? I mean, they all think about, is it paranoia if they really are out to get you? Don't use the psych language. Tell me what the behavior is, and you're listing behavior. It's a data gathering process. So psych jargon guaranteed to get you in trouble with me, at least. And I think it would in most professional settings at the first step of the process. The other thing don't do is we use your judgments. This is always a funny one because most students come into this class saying, oh, psychology, the psychiatric area is so screwed up because they slap these labels on people all the time, and and people get pigeonholed and yada yada. Then I ask them to describe Teresa, and they kind of go, she's a thief, she's a liar, she leeches off society. And I'm going, all those things are judgments, but they're all labels. Is Teresa a thief? Well, that's a label. It's a big label. What I know about Teresa is that Teresa stole a statue. Did she steal cigarettes or food or clothing or money or pens? Or, it's like, I don't have any data about that at all. What I know is there is a case where she stole the statue. Does that make her a thief? Well, maybe, but I'm going, who out there has never stolen anything in their life? Does that make you a thief? The label doesn't help me, because when you say somebody's a thief, or here's the other one, she's violent. Well, what we know from the case study is there's a situation in which she is violent. One. Does that make her a violent person? Have any of you ever been violent ever in your life? Does that make you a violent person? Well, the answer is no. Tell me about the incident. Tell me about the behavior. That's data that we can work with. The label that she's violent or a thief or any of those labels, those are judgments, are not useful, and they do not belong in the initial assessment data. Those are judgments. That's not data. The other thing you want to do in the first part of this thing, in addition to, people, I hesitate at times to, I called them symptoms, but at times it's like, I think I want to record more than just the symptoms. With Teresa, for instance, one of the things that comes up about Teresa is she has 7 cats. Now, is that a symptom? It's like, mostly I'd say, no, I don't think so. mean, there's a place in my life there's a point in my life where I owned 11 cats. Now I happen to live on the edge of town in a farmhouse, and it was the location where people tended to drop off stray cats, often that were pregnant stray cats. And we just couldn't keep up with getting them spayed fast enough. They just kept multiplying because we kept trying to get them spayed and get them fixed. But it's like, but there was a point there where I had 11, maybe more than 11 cats. We had a lot of cats. What is, however, notable to me, so it's like, I don't want to say it's a symptom, but it's notable. It's an unusual thing. Most people don't have 7 cats. So I note it. There are other things about her, for instance, that I note is that, and this is part of the process we're doing, is you're painting a picture of somebody. In your report, you're creating a piece so that I, as your not too bright supervisor, I sit down, read your report, and I go, oh, I get who Teresa is. You want to give enough information that I can get that. Teresa owns 7 cats, or maybe it's 11 cats. She owns a lot of cats. That's unusual. I know it. It's like Teresa dresses. Here's a kind of a light judgment. Teresa dresses funny. I want to say when someone said that to me, I want to say, what? She wear a clown outfit? What does it mean she dressed funny? Well, it means that she then tell me that. Tell me that she dresses in a style that seems more like out of the 60s with a lot of colors and flowing dresses and stuff. Tell me that. That's a behavior. Why is that important? Well, I don't know what it is. And that's one of the things that comes up during the first part of this thing is you're gathering data. And I don't always know when I gather data what's important and what's not. Later, I can come back to it and say, oh, this was important, this was important. This one wasn't. This is important. This one wasn't. But that's okay. Step one, you're collecting data to some extent which paints the larger picture of who Teresa is or the other people in this thing. And that's what you want to be doing, is you want to be painting that picture about it. So you include notable data for people. Teresa's a special thing that's worth paying attention to. Most of the cases I'm going to give you here are not like this. When you're gathering data, there's how the person typically is, and sometimes there's an incident that's more recent, or there's an incident that stands out against it. And one of the questions is the typical behavior how Teresa is on a day-to-day level? That's one thing. And then you have an incident, which is with Teresa in the statute, incident. There's something that went on there. And one key question is the way Teresa behaves during the incident typical the way Teresa would behave normally? And I'll throw that question, read the case stuff over and think about that some. If they are, yeah, those things fit together perfectly fine, then it's not particularly useful to pull out the incident as a separate thing. But if the incident, for some ways, is notable, and in Teresa's, I think it is notable because the incident is why she gets put in custody. The incident is the basis for her being detained against her will. That makes the incident significant to me. Now, there are some folks who are, I mean, they're this close to the edge all the time of getting arrested for something. That doesn't seem to be the case for Teresa. So those things should be reported somewhat distinctly in the process. Now, there are many cases where you're not going to get an incident. You're just going to get, yeah, here's the stuff, and it goes on and on and on. And maybe it gets a little bit higher over time, but it's basically the same stuff. I mean, there's no discontinuity between what's happening here and here. You can draw a straight line between them. That's not so clear with Teresa. And in some cases where there is an incident, that should be reported almost as a piece of the thing, somewhat distinct from this is what she's typically is like. And that's an important sort of distinction to make. It's important in some place here also, these things, to note the apparentlys. And these are things you don't observe. but to some extent, you don't, the not observing them is notable. For instance, what do we know about Teresa's marital status? Does she have a partner? Well, I would say apparently not, in part because the input on it says a lot about here's how she goes shopping, here's how she does this, here's how she does this, here's how she did this, and it never mentions another person. So apparently she's single. Now, I don't know what her marital status is, but it appears that way. Apparently Teresa's got her own place. I assume I'm almost assuming it's an apartment in a building, given how they describe it. But it's not, no one ever says Teresa has a rent subsidized apartment and you never hear that thing. But apparently Teresa has her own place, because you never hear anything about her roommate or her spouse or her sister complaining about the space. So, I mean, there are some apparentlys that are worth noting and thinking about and things about. So often it's not what's not there. The other thing it's really hard to do in this process. I would normally do, if I've done an interview with somebody, that I would report this. And these sorts of things, a very tough one is describing the emotion. What's the emotional state of the person? Emotion is dependent very much on, judging emotion is very much dependent on nonverbals, all kinds of nonverbals. Because I could say the same thing and have it convey very different kinds of things based off my nonverbals. I could say to you, for instance, like, this is not true. My wife left me this weekend. Or I could say to you, my wife left me this weekend. Very different sort of emotion for the same content. You can't get that through my case studies. I mean, it's not possible during the written case studies. You don't have any nonverbals. You don't get tone of voice. You don't get pacing. You don't get any of that kind of stuff. Facial expression, none of it. So you got to be really cautious with that. And I acknowledge that it's one of the weaknesses of the case study, but you would be normally looking to observe that, and particularly looking to observe, is the expression of emotion consistent? Is the verbalized emotion consistent with the expression of emotion? For instance, my sister died this week. It's like, oh, you're gonna go, huh? That's not the way I'd expect that to go. That becomes particularly notable for me when I see inconsistent, articulated emotion different from expressed emotion, where there's some discontinuity between those things. That becomes an important piece for me when I'm doing an intake interview. Let me know one last area. So what I'm telling you is, you've got stuff going on in your head about this woman as you're reading this over, you go, oh my God. And you have things, what I call fantasies. I have some fantasies about why this incident occurred. I don't know why the incident occurred. I have no data. You read the case study and there is no information. Well, I would say there's no information. There's some hints at things, but there's no, you don't know why this incident occurred. It's a notable thing to do. To some extent, I think about this one kind of going, so Teresa, after getting caught shoplifting, threatens an officer, a police officer comes to arrest her. That's really dangerous behavior. People get beat up, they get tasered, they get killed for less than that in this society. Why would that go on? What would motivate that? And that gets, when I'm talking about motivation, it's all in my head here. I'm projecting stuff. I have fantasies about what motivated her, but I don't know what motivated Teresa. And ultimately, I pay attention to my fantasies, but I don't record them in my piece and my assessment. I keep them in mind for when I interview the person, because that's where my questions are going to come. And I think it's really important to keep clear. It's like what I'm asking for in part one here is, what's your data? What do you got clear data about? And that's really important to do in diagnosis, because the diagnosis is going to be based on data. But there are also places where I have what I think of, again, I think of as my fantasies about things. And I often will note those, but not in the same place, because my fantasies, I trust my fantasies, that there's something I'm responding to here that I want more information about. And maybe I'm wrong, in which case, okay, throw that out. Let's go on to the next issue. But sometimes I'm right on with it, and it's stuff that I pay attention to, and so I will bring it back later. Having said that, you go through that first thing. I mean, I'll give you a lot of stuff there. You may want to go back and replay this to go through all the pieces. That's your data gathering piece. And then you typically would go, and you're not going to need to do this for Teresa, but you will the next one, say, given all those things, what's the relative intensity, frequency, and duration of the symptoms? Well, you can read stuff, and this is a judgment. You are making judgments here about, particularly around intensity. Though you get some folks that you'll see as you go through some of the case studies here, the issues about what's high intensity versus low intensity will come up for you, and you got to make some judgment about that. And frankly, if you have some basis for what you're doing, I'm not going to argue with what you put down. This is a place where you have to make judgments about that. Duration is sometimes a tough one because people won't tell you. But if this has been going on since childhood and they're 35 years old, it's been going on a long time. This is long term. And you can think this is short term, this is long term. This is the duration that can be done that way. It's like you don't have to say 6 months or 9 months or 3 years. It's like short term, medium term, long term is enough for duration. Frequency is like some things show up occasionally, some things show up on a regular basis, some things show up frequently. Some cases you say the frequency is all the time. This person's always this way. But that's a place where you stop and think about those things and try and make some judgment about frequency, intensity, and duration. And I would generally, unless something in the case breaks it out differently, I do that in a generic sense about all the things I think of as symptoms ultimately out of this, and how I'm going to deal with those longer term. Once you have, and by the way, I think I've said this, but I'm going to repeat it if I have not. I put down the things I know in a list format. Many of you might kind of go, oh, it's easier for me to write it in narrative format. I'm going, yeah, but it's not easier. It's ultimately, because of a later step, it's not easier. I do it in all these things I observe in a list format, because what's going to happen later is I'm going to go look at symptoms list. And what I'm doing is going to go on, oh, this one connects to this one, and this one connects to this one, and this one connects to this one. This one doesn't connect to anything. Okay. And so I've got this one, and this one, and this one. It's like, and it calls for 6 out of 8. Well, I've got under but you're doing matching of lists, and you're looking at specific behaviors with descriptions of behaviors at this point. If over here in the first part, you've used generic terms, violent, thief, paranoid, and so forth, it's really easy to match this one with things over here then, because it says paranoid over here, I got paranoid over here. I'm going, but that's not a real match. You're looking to match specific behaviors with descriptions of behaviors. So you need to get the specific ones first, and the list format's really the easiest way to do it. And that will come up, that's the last piece of this thing ultimately, is when, there's another step in here, which I do is I ask you also at some point to identify other significant background factors. And there's things like housing, health, those sorts of things, employment, those things get listed in. And those are just useful to have. They may not be clearly connected to the situation you have, but they give a context again for it. And part of what you're doing with the overall assessment is you are painting a very brief clinical picture of the person based off their concrete behavior that you can identify. And that's the process for doing an assessment. So this week, what you're going to have to do is two things. One is read Teresa, list the behaviors, list the things that you think are notable in it. And then you're going to submit that. And I'm going to respond to what you submit. I'm going to go in and I'm going to critique what you're doing. However you do, as long as you submit something, you get 1 point for it. You don't get 3 points if you do it great. You don't get 0 points if you do it badly. You submit something, I give you 1 point. And then once I've given you something here, then you go in and you take your list of behaviors and you go look for, and I'm going to make this easier for you. Teresa has a personality disorder. There's only 12 of them. I want you to go through the 12 personality disorders and figure out which one matches what we have for Teresa. This is a practice process. I'm not trying to do this for credit for you. I just want you to do it and get a chance to do it with feedback so that next week, when I give you another one, you have a much clearer sense about how to do it. And you've gone through the process once with some feedback. So you're more prepared to do a second for the next one. And the one after that, it gets tougher. The challenge level, the case goes up with the next one. So I want to give you one really simple and easy one. Then we're going to do one that's more, you got to do more on, it's the challenge level. And then we're going to do one that's the challenge level is higher and walk through the 3 of those. And then I'll do probably another 2 after that with you on it. Later in the course, I'm going to ask you to do lethality assessments. And in those, you will generally not have enough information to make a diagnosis. However, you will have enough information to make a judgment about lethality of the case. In that case, I don't need to have the same level of material for it, but I'll explain that when we get to it. But so you're gonna do this probably 4 or 5 times during the course. So I'm trying to make sure this is the first time. And that's what the assessment assignment is this week.